going to share a teeny tiny little piece of my heart with you right now. When I was a little kid, I got picked last at everything. Like a really little kid. Elementary school was tough on me. It's not that I was unathletic. I could do things and trip over my own feet, but I was just so little. And so I always get picked last. And back then, gym teachers did not care. The Mr. Conti, Mr. Rumbowski, I think Ralph Rumbowski was his name. That's an amazing gym teacher name. Like they'd have their sweatbands on and their super, super short coach shorts and their tube socks pulled up to their knees. And they just stand there while everybody else got picked, not caring at all what psychological effect that was going to have on whoever was still standing there. And it was me. I was the kid who couldn't do the sit-up or wasn't willing to climb the rope to the top because that's just, have you seen how tall that is, Mr. Rumbowski? I'm not going up there. It's scary. So he's like, oh, that kid needs to learn some toughness. And the best way to achieve that is public humiliation by not making the cut and being chosen last. I actually do think it was probably really good for me. I don't regret it. It maybe put a bit of a competitive chip on my shoulder that I carried with me into adulthood. But even that's fun, right? I think that whether you were the kid who was awesome at all the things or the kid who maybe struggled a teeny tiny bit like I did, we all can relate to the idea of this very primal fear of not making the cut, not having what it takes, not being in the in-group. And maybe because of that shared attribute, that shared phobia that we all have as humans, some of us have read the passage we're looking at in Matthew chapter 24 today and really latched onto it for art, for music, for film, for fiction, and even as a cipher verse for significant theological beliefs. And this is a passage that probably you've heard about before. Probably definitely you've heard about it before if you fit into the more low church Protestant version of Christianity. It's the one about the two people who are hanging around when the return of the Son of Man occurs. And one of them's like working on a thing, the other one's working on a thing, and then boom, one of the two is gone. And the other one's left standing there. I do this sometimes, don't I? Where I'm like, here, it's the verse, it's kind of like this, and this is kind of a summary. It would take me literally 3 seconds. Just read the verse. I'm just going to read the verse. Here's the verse. It's Matthew 24, verse 40. 2 men will be in a field. One will be taken, and the other left. 2 women will be grinding with a hand mill. One will be taken and the other left. The end. That was it. Why didn't I just lead with that? I mean, what Jesus is describing here is it's the ultimate getting picked last. It's the ultimate final rejection. And it's troubling and it's upsetting, and especially with our increasingly, maybe even rightly, equitable mindset toward making sure that people feel included and cared for, as long as they think the right opinions on certain topics, that, you know, we don't like people to feel this way. And so this is going to be a passage that cuts to the quick for people for a lot of different reasons. But what is he actually saying here? Well, as has been the case with a lot of what we looked at in Matthew 24 and this whole 5th of the 5 great speeches around which the book of Matthew is structured, this one being the Olivet Discourse. Like we've discovered with most of the more complicated stuff in the book of Matthew, if you look at it in context and you think about the flow of the argument, the rationale, you think about who's saying it and who they're talking to and what the question was that precipitated it. It's like, oh, I think I know what he means here. So let's just apply that trick. All right. So the disciples come to Jesus and they're like, when's this end of stuff going to happen? What'll be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? That's Matthew 24, verse 3. And then Jesus, as we've discussed, gives them a multifaceted answer. And as we're going along, we probably assume that it's not as precise as they would have liked because he's just withholding stuff. But later we discover that he doesn't actually know the exact day or the hour. Only the Father knows that. And Jesus' multifaceted, slightly vague answer to their very reasonable question starts with, well, a whole bunch of things are going to happen in history, and they're going to seem like a huge deal, and they are. But that's just the world being the world, it's history being the history. You just be faithful, don't worry about all of that stuff. Then there's going to be some kind of profaning of the temple, of a holy place. That's going to initiate a time of difficulty. And during that time, there are going to be people who are like, hey, the Messiah's back. He's over here. Oh, the Son of Man's back. He's over there in the desert in that windowless van. Go over there and check it out. But it's not going to be him. And then Jesus goes on to say, in answer to their question, when the Son of Man returns, it's going to be super, super obvious. Like the physical, natural world is going to shake, and the Son of Man will appear in this unmissable way, and the angels are going to come and gather up the elect from the 4 corners of the earth. And then just in case that was getting a bit overwhelming, Jesus pivots a little bit, as he always does so artfully. He goes from this is hard, it's getting harder, this is harder to conceptualize, this is super complicated, but let me just boil it down to a little story about a tree in your garden in the springtime. You know how when the twigs of that thing start to get a little bit more wiggly and you see the little buds appear and you're like, oh, well, it's just about springtime. Look at that. Hey, if you can read the fig tree in your garden, you can read these signs as well as you actually need to be able to read them to see what's coming. When all this stuff starts shaking, it's right around the corner. It'll happen sometime, anytime. And you can take that to the bank. But some people are going to miss it. They're not going to be able to look at the little fig tree and be like, oh, look at the branches getting wiggly. They're not going to be able to see the signs. They're just going to miss it. They're going to be busy with like the stuff that they need to do, perfectly normal stuff. And it's just like when the Noah thing happened. Some people are going to be ready, but a lot of people, they're just not going to be ready. And they are going to be, what is the exact line? They knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. This is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. Did you hear how I hit that took word real hard there at the end of my summary of what Jesus was saying? Because I think there's a hint to what he means in the passage we're looking at today, and that word took. There's a continuity between these two ideas. And then after that business about the days of Noah, we get into what we're looking at today, this left out business about two men being in the field, and one gets taken and the other left. All right, so this isn't hard. When are we talking about here? Oh, we're talking about the day of the Son of Man. We're talking about the day of the return of the Son of Man, the moment that the disciples were asking about all the way back at the beginning of the chapter, weeks and weeks ago of conversation. That is the moment we're talking about. And so clearly Jesus is saying in context, when that moment happens, that the Son of Man returns, which is going to be kind of hard to miss, and the angels, whatever this looks like or whatever it means, are going around to the four corners of the earth and they're somehow gathering the people who are kingdom citizens. When all of that is going down, you're going to have two people doing normal things that the original audience would have imagined people doing. Apparently, one of them is taken and the other is left. Well, it kind of sounds like the days of Noah business from just a passage earlier. Like people were just doing normal stuff like eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage. Remember, that's Jesus' exact language there. Well, this is the way it's going to go down. When the Son of Man shows up, it's going to hit so quick. It's going to be like a flood. Some people are going to be positioned for it, and some people aren't going to be positioned for it. And there's going to be this great sorting out. And I just about said, and implicit in that, but it's not really implicit if you look at the context pretty explicitly with what Jesus has just got done saying through chapter 24, and very explicitly moving forward through the end of 24 and into 25. What he's intoning, what he's saying out loud is, like, you want to be the one who was ready. You want to be the one who was positioned properly and who was aware that some sort of unfolding was occurring and that the end of history had not yet occurred and that the return of the Son of Man was a thing that was definitely going to happen. Now, there is an interesting footnote here in terms of historical theology that I think we got to mention because it affects our ability to read this passage. In the last 100 years and change now, there's been an expression of thought within Protestantism that, I don't know, some people might really like, others might have a few questions about. But this expression of Orthodox historical Christianity has a read of the unfolding of future things that suggests that there is going to be some sort of collecting of the people of God that happens in secret somewhere in this timeline. And the idea then, in this particular school of theological thought, is that there'll be a reality at some point where everybody's just doing their stuff, like working on the car, flying in an airplane, working in a field, grinding grain, getting a meal ready, shaving their face, and then poof, all of a sudden, a whole bunch of people are gone because in secret, God or Jesus gathered these people up and took them away in the midst of or right before a time of great suffering. Now, if you go and you look in some other parts of the Bible, you can better understand how someone could come to that conclusion. It's possible that's a read somebody could have. But if we're just looking at this text, nothing about this really gives the indication that there's a secret collecting of the people of God that happens before the very obvious return of the Son of Man. I mean, it looks like the most natural read here is that the Son of Man shows up in a way that's pretty evident and pretty noticeable to everybody, real hard to miss, and that as a part of this day of the return of the Son of Man, there's this amazing and frankly kind of scary at a very deep human phobia level, sorting out or sifting or separation that's going to occur. And we've seen Jesus talk about that sifting, that judgment, that separation in other places, including at the end of the Sermon on the Mount. So is it possible that if you look at the whole Bible, there is some kind of secret collection of the kingdom citizens that happens supernaturally, but in a way that's physically visible before the return of the Son of Man that Jesus is describing here in Matthew 24? Sure, there are people who could probably make a really strong case for that. I'm not trying to say they're wrong or dumb. What I am trying to say is that in this text in particular, it looks like that is a part of the unmissable day of the return of the Son of Man and not something that predates it and happens in a way that would leave people scratching their head. One last note on this. It's always been assumed, or at least by a lot of modern readers, that the one who is left is the one who got the raw deal, and the one who gets taken away is assumed up into heaven, like Jesus experienced in Acts chapter 1. But given the language of the previous passage where we're talking about Noah, and remember it reads in verse 39, Matthew 24, and they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. Well, the people who got taken away in the flood, to use Jesus' language, were the ones who weren't ready and didn't get it right and faced this terrible fate, this pitiable fate. But the same language, take and took, that's being used in the very next passage that we're looking at today. 2 men will be in a field, one will be taken and the other left. And as a result of that, there are some who would read this passage and say, no, the ones who are taken are the ones who are taken to some kind of judgment and some sort of kingdom of Christ in a physically realizable way is happening with the ones who are left. I don't need to pick a fight about that or sort through every possible linguistic wrinkle. The point is, I don't think it's completely evident from the text whether the desirable thing is to be, quote, taken, or the desirable thing is to be, quote, left behind. And the fact that there's enough ambiguity here in what Jesus says for us to even debate which would be the thing that would be good and desirable here means that the taken left behind dynamic and what that all means for the grand story of everything and how to connect all the dots theologically about how precisely everything will unfold in the end of time is not the point. The point of it all is spelled out crystal clearly by Jesus in the very next sentence. Therefore, keep watch, because you do not know on what day your Lord will come. So readiness, rightness with God, on-boardness with the plan and the values of the kingdom in difficult times and easy times throughout the unfolding of world events, that would seem to be the primary reason for what Jesus is saying here. Grace and peace to all y'all, even if you don't think the same stuff about this as I do. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.